الحمد لله العلي الذات عظيم الصفات سمي السمات كبير الشأن جليل القدر الرفيع الذكر مطاع الأمر جلي البرهان فخيم الاسم غزير العلم وسيل الحلم كثير الغفران جميل الثناء جزيل العطاء مجيب الدعاء عميم الإحسان سريع الحساب شديد العقاب أليم العذاب عزيز السلطان ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له في الخلق والأمر ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله المبعوث إلى الأسود والأحمر المنعوت بشرح الصدر ورفع الذكر وصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه الذين هم خلاصة العرب العرباء وخير الخلائق بعد الأنبياء أما بعد فيا أيها الناس وحدوا الله فإن التوحيد رأس الطاعات واتقوا الله فإن التقوى ملاك الحسنات وعليكم بالسنة فإن السنة تهدي إلى الطاعة ومن أطاع الله ورسوله فقد رشد واهتدى وإياكم والبدعة فإن البدعة تهدي إلى المعصية ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد ضل وغوى وعليكم بالإحسان فإن الله يحب المحسنين وادعوه فإنه مجيب الداعين واستغفروه يمددكم بأموال وبنين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن إبراهيم كان أمة قانتا لله حنيفا ولم يكن من المشركين شاكرا لأنعمه اجتباه وهداه إلى صراط مستقيم وآتيناه في الدنيا حسنة وإنه في الآخرة لمن الصالحين. By the grace and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we find ourselves in the very blessed days of the month of Dhul Hijja. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is limitless, is all-encompassing. It has no limitations. It has no restrictions. It is not confined by anything. Inna rahmati wasi'at kulla shay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares in the Quran that my mercy encompasses everything. Meaning it is not limited or confined or restricted by anything. Not time, not place, not anyone, not anything. However, one of the very fascinating and philosophical curiosities within our religion is whenever we hear that when you pray, for instance, as many people right now are, when you pray at the Kaaba, then your reward is multiplied by this many thousands of times. When we hear that when you worship in the month of Ramadan, then your reward is multiplied and increased by this much. That deeds are more virtuous, are more beloved to God during the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijja. That's a very interesting curiosity. Because on one side we're saying, the mercy of Allah is limitless. It has no restrictions. Then on the other hand, we're saying that there are specific times and places where there's more reward, more virtue, more blessing. So how do we reconcile the two? And the way that we reconcile the two is by understanding that there are two sides to this equation. There's the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what we need to understand there is Allah's mercy, Allah's generosity, Allah's reward, Allah's kindness, Allah's blessing is limitless. Allah can reward anyone for praying just as much. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can reward anyone for praying here just as much as He rewards them for praying in Mecca. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have that limitation on Him. But the other side of the equation is us. And it's very important to understand who we are. Understanding who you are, what makes you tick, how you operate, how you function is very important. Understanding your own nature. Because then you understand what you're dealing with. And Allah has told us about ourselves in the Quran. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. The human being is a very covetous creature. The human being craves, worries, desires. But at the same time, the human being is constantly afraid, nervous, anxious. إِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. When he gets something good, he wants more and more and more of it, all of it. وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا. When there's even the threat, even the thought of something negative occurring, the human being becomes very fearful and anxious and nervous. So we, as human beings, are very greedy and covetous creatures. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala motivates us by that which works to motivate us. And that is a simple fact. When there's a sale at a store, the line is out the door. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designates some places, certain times, as being more virtuous, to reignite our spiritual fire, to motivate us once again, to work harder, to get back to the good that we were doing earlier. And so that is a way to keep us on our toes and to keep us motivated. And so we, not long ago, even though it seems like a distant memory, we had the blessing in the month of Ramadan. And we saw that that motivation, that incentive, it worked. We went so far beyond what we expected of ourselves in the month of Ramadan. Because again, the blessing of that time and that motivation, it worked. To drive us to work harder, to do better, to do good. And a couple of months have passed since Ramadan. And hopefully that's not the case. But the reality is that many of us have probably seen a decrease since the month of Ramadan, where we maybe find ourselves right where we were before Ramadan came. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His infinite wisdom and His mercy and His blessing, He provides us with another opportunity where we arrive here in the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijja. You know, sometimes in these days and leading up to these days, there's so much fervor and excitement and discussion and talk about Hajj and those going for Hajj. Pretty much over the last month, every time you've heard a lecture, every time there's a workshop or a seminar going on, or every time you turn on your phone and there's a lecture, there's a Facebook Live, there's a video going on. It was all about preparing for Hajj, how to do Hajj, the fiqh of Hajj. Going for Hajj, well, here's what you need to know. But all of us who are gathered here today, we have to understand that we're not, obviously we're here, we're not going for Hajj, and you start to feel kind of left out. And indirectly, we can start to kind of get the idea that those who have gone for Hajj, it's a really awesome opportunity for them, but for the rest of us, we're just spectators. We're just going to look at their pictures, read their reflections on Facebook, we'll see some of their stories, and then that'll be the end of it for us. But what we have to understand is that today is the day of Friday. It is a blessed day. The Prophet ﷺ said, this is a day of light, a day of nur. And we also have to understand that these are during the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijja, which even for those of us who are not on Hajj, this is still an extremely blessed opportunity to do some really amazing things. Where the Prophet ﷺ talked about it. مَا مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أَحَبُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ الْعَمَلُ فِيهِنَّ مِنْ أَيَّامِ مِنْ عَشْرِ ذِي الْحِجَّةِ. That there are no days in the calendar year in which good deeds and good actions are more beloved to God than the 10 days of Dhul Hijja. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he comments as to why are these days so blessed, like some of the wisdom behind it. What makes these days so blessed? He said, because these are the only days of the entire year on which all these amazing acts of worship concurrently occur. People are fasting, people are praying, people are reading Quran, people are making the dhikr of Allah, people are doing takbir, people are giving charity, sacrifices of animals are being made around the globe, food is being provided to the poor and the needy around the world, and our brothers and sisters are doing Hajj at the same time concurrently while we are doing all these other things. So this is a very blessed opportunity where the whole world currently during these days is engulfed in the mercy and the blessing of Allah. We are enshrouded by the mercy of Allah. And so we really have to understand what a blessing this is. Now the next thing, after just a little bit of a reminder to myself and everyone else about what a blessing these days are, and of course, there's daily programs going here on here at the Masjid that are talking about all these different things. But Jummua a lot of times is a very unique opportunity. Folks come together from a lot of different places. And so I wanted to take this opportunity. Now, what are some things we can do to capitalize on the virtue and the blessing of these 10 days? And I'm just going to bullet point them out. I'm not going to take a lot of time here. There's another very significant point that I'd like to make here in the khutbah today. A few items that we can do. First and foremost, the Prophet ﷺ, it is narrated about him through authentic narrations that the Prophet ﷺ used to fast the first 9 days of the month of Dhul Hijja. Now, working backwards, the 10th day of Dhul Hijja, for us who are not at Hajj, who are at home, it's going to be the day of Eid, which is Tuesday. We do not fast on the day of Eid. The Prophet forbade it. So we will not be fasting on Tuesday. But the first 9 days the Prophet ﷺ used to fast. The day of Monday is what we call Yawm Arafah. That's a very special day of fasting, where the Prophet ﷺ said if you fast on that day, it will forgive the sins of your previous year, and it will serve as a guiding light for you throughout the coming year. It will protect you from sin in the coming year. So that day, Monday, inshallah, we should all aim to fast. But even the days leading up to it, Sunday, Saturday, Friday, like all these days, as much as time as we have left, the Prophet ﷺ used to fast on these days, consecutively throughout the first 9 days. So let's try to fast as much as we can. Particularly the weekend a lot of times provides an opportunity to be able to fast. A lot of people don't have work, the kids don't have school, things like that. But particularly Monday, we should circle that on our calendar and we should aim to fast on that day. A lot of folks will say, but I got work and the kids got school. We forgot 2 months ago, the month of Ramadan. The days were longer, they were hotter. And we still had work and a lot of our kids still had school. But we fasted and we prayed throughout the night. So we're capable of doing it. We proved it to ourselves that we're capable of doing it. Just 2 months ago. So inshallah, let's aim to fast on that Monday. The second thing is that the Prophet ﷺ used to increase the amount of time that he would spend in the Masjid. And it's narrated, Abdul Nasir, a great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, during the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijja, every day from Asr to Maghrib, he would have lectures and classes where he would teach the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the meaning of the Quran, the tafsir. He would teach people from Asr to Maghrib every day throughout the first 9 days. Ibn Asakir rahimahullah ta'ala talks about how many of the Aslaf used to even observe i'tikaf during the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijja. So let's increase the amount of time that we come to the Masjid and we spend in the Masjid. So if you normally come a couple of times a week, let's try to come at least once a day or a couple of times a day. Come for Fajr in the morning before you go to work. Come for Maghrib and Isha after work. But let's try to increase our frequency within the Masjid during these blessed days. The third thing is that the Prophet ﷺ specifically emphasized and encouraged at-takbir, wa-tahleel, wa-tahmeed. The Prophet ﷺ used to increase the amount of his remembrance and dhikr of Allah during these days, saying La ilaha illallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, increasing the remembrance and the glorification of Allah. So let's try to build that into our daily routine for the few days that we have remaining. That while we're driving to work in the morning, we can turn the radio off. And we can make some dhikr on the way to work. When we're coming back home from work or coming back home from school, we can turn the radio off. And we can increase some of the remembrance and the dhikr of Allah. But let's try to increase that during these days. Now the second thing that I wanted to talk about very, very quickly and briefly, but it's also very, very important. These days of the month of Dhul Hijja, particularly the Hujjaj who are performing the rites of Hajj, even us, the observations of worship that we'll be making as the day of Eid approaches, of Eid and the sacrifice and things of that nature, a lot of it is from the legacy of the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, whom the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in fact in the Quran, God, Allah referred to him as our spiritual forefather. Millata abikum Ibrahim. This is the tradition of your forefather Abraham. Now that means that regardless of whether or not somebody exactly comes from the blood lineage of Ibrahim, he is our spiritual forefather. When the Prophet ﷺ was asked, "Ma hadhihi al-adahi ya Rasulullah," what is the objective and the purpose behind these sacrifices of Eid that we make? The Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, "Sunnatu abikum Ibrahim." This is the tradition of your spiritual forefather Abraham. And so Ibrahim ﷺ is the focal point of a lot of these days. And a lot of what we're doing these days goes back to the practice and the teachings of our Messenger ﷺ, who told us, who taught us that this comes from the legacy of our spiritual forefather, the Prophet of God, the friend of Allah, Ibrahim ﷺ. And there's one specific thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to Ibrahim ﷺ. The story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us many stories of the prophets in the Quran. And they all have there are certain universals. They all strove for the oneness of Allah, to establish the oneness of God, to take people away from the worship of things, creation, and take them to the worship of the Creator. Those are universals. All the prophets of God talked about the importance of things like family value. وَإِذَا أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ لَا تَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. They all talked about worship only Allah. And respect family values, honor your parents. So there are certain universals. But then there are very unique things about the different stories of the different prophets that we can take lessons from. And that's why Allah gives them to us in the Quran. تِلْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادًا. Right? The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. That there are profound lessons in their stories for us. And one of the real powerful lessons in the story of Ibrahim ﷺ is resilience. Resilience. To be resilient. And in case somebody's not familiar with that word, to understand what that means. That means that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, no matter how hard you've been knocked down, you always get back up. You know who you are. You know what you believe. You know what you stand for. You understand what you're striving for. And you're not willing to give it up no matter what happens. You're willing to sacrifice whatever it takes. Think about someone. Right? Think about all the examples we have in front of us. Maybe some of these are personal to us. And I don't mean to demean anyone, just as an example. When someone gets it set, not within their mind, but within their heart, they become obsessed with the idea, I want to be a doctor. Look at what they're willing to do. They spend all their money. They spend all their parents' money. They're willing to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans that they'll be paying back for the next 20 years of their life. They're willing to move halfway across the country. They're willing to live in a small apartment with 8 other people. Eat ramen noodles for the next 8 years. They're willing to walk back and forth to class. Work any type of an odd job to make some cash. They're willing to study 16, 18 hours a day till they bleed through their nose for years and years and years. They're willing to put off marriage, family, all the enjoyments and the pleasures of life. They're willing to give up all their free time, all their luxuries, miss family occasions, miss weddings. They're willing to sacrifice everything just so that at the end of that 10-year or 12-year journey, they are now a doctor. And I'm not here to talk about whether that's okay or not. I don't care. What I'm here to talk about is an example. When someone became obsessed with the idea of something, became fixated onto something, look what they were willing to do. How much personal, professional, emotional, financial sacrifice they were willing to make in order to achieve that goal. And now let's try to understand what our relationship with Allah is supposed to mean to us. He's the one who gave us everything. The only way to find peace and happiness and blessing in this life is to have a good relationship with Him. The only way to succeed in the hereafter and go to paradise is to be good with God. Have a good relationship with Allah. What should we be willing to sacrifice in order to achieve that? And Ibrahim alayhi salam is a role model in that. I won't go into the specific instances and stories. Of course, the khutbah doesn't allow for that much time. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذِ ابْتَلَىٰ إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ بِكَلِمَاتٍ. When his Lord, Allah tested Ibrahim through so many different ways. Time and time again throughout his entire life. Was he willing to give up his life, be thrown into a fire for what he believed in? Yes. And he popped right back up. Was he willing to leave his family behind to spread the word of God for what he believed in? Yes. He popped right back up. Was he willing to sacrifice his own blood? His own child? The most beloved thing to any human being, even more than life itself, is your child. Was he willing to sacrifice that for Allah? And what he believed in? Yes, even though Allah did not make him do it. But he was willing. And he popped right back up. That resilience, faith, fortitude. And that's why the verse I recited, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan. Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, ummah usually means a nation. What does that mean? Abraham was a nation unto himself. What does that mean? Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the great companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he explains, الَّذِي يُعَلِّمُ النَّاسَ الْخَيْرِ الَّذِي يُعَلِّمُ النَّاسَ دِينَهُم. He's a person who is willing to sacrifice themselves in order to teach people good, in order to spread the word of God. قَانِتًا لِلَّهِ. He was completely devoted to his relationship with Allah. That was his number one priority. Hanifan, focused, resilient. لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. There was nothing that could take him away from that. شَاكِرًا لِأَنْعُمِهِ. He appreciated all the blessings of God in his life. اجتباه وهداه إلى صراط مستقيم. God chose him and guided him to the straight path. وَآتِينَاهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً. And when you're willing to sacrifice for Allah, Allah will not make you suffer here endlessly. Allah gave him beautiful things in this life. Where the Quran in Surah Baqarah tells us about Ibrahim on his deathbed talking to his sons, who were prophets of God. He gave him the coolness of the eyes and the pleasure of this world, a beautiful family, peace and tranquility. He got to see his life's work come to fruition. But he made that investment where in the life of the hereafter he will be amongst those who are honored by God. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to follow the footsteps, to follow the tradition of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So during these first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijja, as we're going through them, let's think and focus on the lessons of the life of Abraham. And try to inculcate, develop that spirit of faith, belief, but also resilience. Be strong in what you believe in. Know who you are and what you believe. And be willing to stand up for it and be willing to sacrifice for it. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعني وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. آمين. والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى أزواجه وذريته اللهم اعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سببا لمن اهتدى اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك اللهم احسن عاقبتنا في الأمور كلها وآتنا من خزي الدنيا الدنيا وعذاب الآخرة. اللهم وفقنا لما تحب وترضى. وصلى الله تعالى على النبي الكريم. قال الله تعالى: إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقم الصلاة.